Hi, I'm Jason, the Curious Psychiatrist, and I'm so happy to meet you. Last time, I talked about how the evolution of human thought can be seen in the evolution of art. And we saw how human thought jumped back and forth between religion and humanism, ultimately ending up in humanism. We started in ancient Egypt, stopped in Greece and the Middle Ages, and ended up in Italy and the Renaissance. Today, I'm going to talk about how art became more and more real and stopped right before the Impressionists. So, let's get going. Humanism gained a foothold in the collective consciousness during the Renaissance, and afterwards gradually spread out until it replaced religion. In art, this trend manifested itself through realism. In other words, we were now more interested in how we saw things rather than how God saw things. This also progressed slightly differently between sculptures and paintings. Sculptures are in 3D rather than 2D, so they were already significantly more real. To make them even more real, other characteristics had to be added, as we shall see. On the other hand, paintings portray 3D images onto 2D surfaces, and so artistic techniques had to be developed to turn this into this. It took a while, but after 200 years, paintings also become very, very real. And then, at the very peak of this realism, something very, shall I say, fleeting appeared and took hold of the art world. Now, I'm going to go over these changes, starting with sculptures. To become more real, two qualities had to be accentuated: dynamism and emotions. A good example of the first one is this piece by Bernini. And yes, the Bernini who carved and planted the Illuminati sculptures in Angels and Demons. He lived about 100 years after Michelangelo, in a period called the Baroque. This piece is called the David, and he resides in the Galleria Borghese. And if you haven't been there, I highly recommend a visit. After a quiet walk through a lovely garden, you will be rewarded by a magnificent view from the villa and everything else that's inside, including this, of course. The first time I saw him, I ducked. Really, no kidding. At the time, a couple of sculptures had been grouped together in a room, and after being immersed in Apollo and Daphne, I turned around and then immediately ducked. Only then did I realize what it was. For a moment, I actually thought he was throwing something at me. The dynamism of it becomes clearer if we compare it with this. Both are exquisite, marvelous, and as real as can be. But while Michelangelo's David is the cool kid standing relaxed in the corner, Bernini's David is the acrobatic fighter in the thick of the fighting. The accentuation of emotion can be seen in another of his pieces, the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Other than comment on the setting, which with the rays of sunlight shining down from above, and the realism, I just want to mention one thing. In Angels and Demons, Robert Langdon mentions that the story of Saint Teresa seems to be a metaphor for sex. I'm not going to judge that. But I do want to say that the Saint Teresa I saw that day certainly seemed to be in the middle of a very, very intense orgasm. Indeed, it may be one of the first mainstream expressions of eroticism in the visual arts, The controversies surrounding this piece is a story for another time, but I think it's safe to say that Bernini took sculptures to a whole new level. And then, 250 years later, Rodin appeared and took it to the next level, as we shall see. Rodin is considered the founder of modern sculptures, and I'm sure you folks have seen photos of his works, such as The Thinker, The Burghers of Calais, The Gates of Hell, and also the emotional and overtly sexual, erotic, The Kiss. There are a number of versions of it, and I've been lucky enough to see two of them. The one in the Musée Rodin and the one at the Tate Modern. It's not as commanding as Michelangelo's David or dynamic as Bernini's David, and it's not even plainly sexual when you compare it to today's pornography, although it did cause quite a scene when it was first unveiled. However, as you walk around it, and I really mean walk around it, you start to feel something subtle but strong. The intimacy, the longing, the flutter of hearts between the two lovers as their lips are just about to meet. They don't actually meet. Once the emotions of the piece seep into you, it's not easy to look away. For a full course on Rodin, I strongly recommend a trip to the Musée Rodin in Paris, where you can enjoy a lot, and I mean a lot, of his works. And if you get there, I hope you get to take a stroll in the garden. And while you're in the garden, I hope you keep an eye out for a certain pair of hands. They will be somewhat larger than normal hands, and as you approach them, you'll be taken aback by their strength and sensuality. Surprisingly, among all the remarkable pieces here, these hands made the strongest impression on me. It was just two large hands, positioned in a natural way without any other body parts, yet they were profoundly erotic. And I think it's an extraordinary example of what you can do with a block of stone. Sadly, I wasn't able to find a photo of it, but I really do hope you get to see it. We've seen how sculptures became more and more real with the accentuation of dynamism and emotions. Now, let's move on to paintings. As I mentioned before, from the 17th to the 18th century, paintings became more and more real as they tried to reflect how we see things. They became sharper and more real. And they started to show scenes how we would have seen them. Also, as a side effect, to increase contrast, darker palettes began to be used as there was a limit to how bright you can make a canvas. This is the Descent from the Cross by Paul Rubens and was painted in the early 1600s. It immediately stands out by the sharp and crisp quality of the figures, and also by the bright light illuminating the scene, which seems to be just outside the upper right-hand corner. In earlier works, light was just uniformly distributed in paintings. And then, in this painting by Velázquez, titled Las Manidas, or The Maids of Honor, you can see how depth has been added to an already realistic scene. And about 10 years later, Vermeer painted this girl, which you're probably already familiar with. A term used to describe Vermeer's works is photorealistic, and you can see it in how the extremely exact rendering of light, down to the folds of her hair ornament, gives the painting a photo-like quality, making it as close as possible to something you would actually see. After rigorously rigorously pursuing realism, a flamboyant and ostentatious trend took a hold of paintings in the 18th century, reflecting the aristocratic tastes of the day. This trend was named Rococo. The paintings were realistic, detailed, but also glamorous, as can be seen in this painting by Fragonard. Large portraits and huge representations of historic scenes were also painted, such as these. And by huge, I really mean huge. This coronation of Napoleon is 10 meters wide by 6 meters high. And when you stand in front of it, it makes you feel very small, which the artist most likely intended. We're going to stop here today and start with the Impressionists next time. It'll be the last and probably the most interesting part of our journey. So please, stay tuned.